Welcome to On the Way Classroom with Tony Crisp. Each weekday, Monday through Friday, Dr. Crisp will teach the Bible from its historical, geographical, linguistic, and cultural context. Tune in daily to start your day right and to deepen your understanding of how to better walk the way and enjoy the journey. Now, here's your host, Dr. Tony Crisp.
Welcome to On the Way Classroom. I'm Tony Crisp, and I am thrilled that you're here today, especially for the continuing introduction to the Gospel of Luke. In our last session, we learned about who Luke is and his specific purpose for writing, the fact that he was the personal physician of the Apostle Paul, the recipient of the letter Theophilus, and what the entire purpose of the Gospel of Luke was, and that is to introduce Jesus as the Son of Man. And as he introduced him, throughout the entire book, Luke stresses the humanity of Jesus. Not only will we see that he stresses his birth and the details of his birth as no other, but throughout the Gospel of Luke, we read about Jesus sleeping, eating, being tired, expressing the emotions as any man would do, all of these things. And then in the closing chapters, especially Luke 24, we're going to spend time learning about what Jesus said to his disciples to prove that indeed he was a resurrected man, that he is entirely man, as well as entirely God, as we will see in the Gospel of John. Now, if you have trouble understanding and your mind has trouble grasping such infinite concepts as the Trinity or Jesus being all God and all man, just remember that's why we need the Holy Spirit of God to help us, because God is the one, the Holy Spirit is the one who inspired our Bibles. He's the one that gave oversight to make sure that what these writers, every Bible writer from Moses to John, what they wrote down were indeed the very words of God. That doesn't mean when we talk about, as you'll recall in the early days of these video classrooms, I told you that doesn't mean that God dictated everything like someone would to a secretary, but the Holy Spirit prepared the writers, prepared their minds, prepared the circumstances, prepared the days in which they were living, so that they would write down out of a certain personality that God had overseen throughout their whole life, and they would write with a certain style that was just what was needed for the recipients that would receive these books. And so it was with Luke. And so as we read through these books, just remember that these are men, sinful men, fallen men who wrote these words. But because the Spirit of God guided them and helped them to write down what they needed to write down, the very words that they put on the paper or on the papyrus or on the sheepskin, the vellum, or wherever it was that they wrote with whatever instrumentation, it was the inspired words of God. So when we closed our last session, we left Luke and Theophilus with the announcement by Gabriel of the birth of John the Baptist that was the forerunner of Jesus. Isaiah spoke of this forerunner more than any other prophet, and he gave great details of not only his message, but his manhood and what John would be like. And so you have a miraculous birth with an older woman, Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, and an older man, Zechariah, that was his father. John came from a priestly tribe that was serving. And here this angel Gabriel was sent from God, and now he's sent again. When you open up the Gospel of Luke, in verse 26 of this first long chapter, He says, "Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth." Now, Galilee was a Roman province. During the days of Jesus, the land was divided in the same way that it is in modern day Israel. You had in the very lower end of our map of Israel, you will see Idumea. Those were the Edomites and offspring of them. But as you came farther north, you would come to Judea. That is the Roman pronunciation of Judah. And then you would have the center of the country called Samaria. And the reason it was called Samaria is because Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom of the nation of Israel. And after the exile and the scattering and the destruction of the northern tribe, the methodology of disbursement and control of the Assyrians was to decimate a people. Only leave a tenth, then scatter people that are natives, for instance, and residents of Samaria in the northern kingdom, scatter them throughout the kingdom to unfamiliar places with unfamiliar language, so it would take them a long time to ever be friends and to share and to have enough common language so they could ever rebel against the kingdom of Assyria. And then they would bring in from those places into Samaria different people. This is where in the New Testament we will read about the Samaritans, because the Samaritans were what would have been in slang called half-breeds. That is, they were people who were brought in from all over the world that would have resided in that northern kingdom, and especially around Samaria and Sychar, Shechem of the Old Testament. And there they would have interbred with the Jewish people. And from that came a quasi-Jewish religion that had part of Judaism in it and part of other things that came from other countries and religions, and they formed the Samaritans. And they had their own rituals, and Mount Gerizim was their sacred mountain, like Jerusalem was for the Jews. And so they had their own worship system. And as a matter of fact, parts of those rituals are still enacted in modern time by the Samaritans. But they were not fully Jew. And those from Jerusalem who were religious, they despised the Samaritans because they looked at them as counterfeits and not all Jew. And so this is why Jesus told the parable of the Good Samaritan, to show that in every tribe and every kindred there are people that we might not like, but they are people that many times act more godly than God's people. And so this is the whole point of why the Samaritans were the hated people. This is why the confrontation that we'll see in the Gospel of John at Jacob's well at Sychar or at Shechem, that area, that Jesus had the confrontation about the place of worship and how that is not going to be priority in how to know God, is where you worship or how you worship, but rather a personal relationship with the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. All of that we read about in the Gospels. And so I'm taking the time to tell you this because this is part of the makeup. You had Judea in the south, then you had Samaria in the middle of the country, and then in the north was the Galilee, and there was a lower Galilee and an upper Galilee. All of this is what made up the Roman provinces of what was the nation of Israel. Now, there were other parts of it that were on the other side of the Jordan that we'll talk about at a different time as we go through other parts of the gospel and the letters of the New Testament. But you just need for now to know that you had Judea, which was where Jerusalem was. Just north of that, in what would have been the tribe of Benjamin, starts what is called Samaria. And then when you cross over that Jezreel Valley, which is the end of the Samaritan Mountains, you have a flat plain there, the Vale of Jezreel, or the Valley of Esdraelon, as the Romans would have called it. And then north of that are the beginning of the rolling hills of the lower Galilee and the Sea of Galilee and the mountains and the terrain around it. And then above that Sea of Galilee to the north, you have the hills of the tribe of Naphtali, the high mountains of Naphtali, the ancient tribe of Naphtali. That was called the Upper Galilee. Now, let me just take a moment to tell you that that is easily a line of distinction and demarcation today, but it wasn't so easy in the days before the measurement for elevation and so forth. But the ancient rabbis said that where you could tell when you left the lower Galilee to the upper Galilee was the lower Galilee, you had almond trees. But the upper Galilee, or the high mountains, what would have been the line would have been the place where the almond trees did not grow and bud. And so the ancients had ways that were far beyond and in some ways superior to how we do things today, which are based upon instruments of measurement. And so I'm just sharing this with you to give you the historical and geographical background of these Gospels. And so the Galilee was a province. The city was Nazareth. Now, before we get into the birth and any more about Mary and Joseph, I want to tell you just a bit about Nazareth. Nazareth is a place where many go today, and they go to the well and the church of the announcement, where the Roman Catholic Church and then the Byzantines built a church over those sites. They're almost side by side, and always you will see that, it seems, in what is called the Holy Land, the land of Israel today. But Nazareth is a sprawling city. It's the largest in the Galilee, and it has between now 80 and 100,000 people. It has your older town, which is below the lower part, and then you have an upper city of Nazareth, which has now changed its entire name and is not even called Upper Nazareth or Nazareth Elite as it once was. But during the days of Jesus, it was not a sprawling city. As a matter of fact, from everything I can research in the ancient annals of history and Roman chronicles and the writings of Josephus and others, I have found and have come to believe that Nazareth was a town of not much more than 100 people, if that. When you read about Joseph being a carpenter, that was not just working with wood, but it was also working with stone. He was a builder. And more than likely, there was not enough work there in that little village that was built around a well there and a water source. But probably Joseph, if I were to give an educated guess, worked in places like Sapori, which was just right over the hill, and wasn't very far away at all, and that was a major metropolitan area during the days of Jesus' childhood and his development as a man. And so that's Nazareth, and this is where the angel Gabriel was dispatched to give Mary the announcement that would change the world forevermore.
Thanks for listening to On the Way Classroom with Dr. Tony Crisp. Tune in each weekday for more information on how to read, study, and understand the Bible. If you have questions, please write to questions@tonycrisp.org. That's questions@tonycrisp.org. Questions@tonycrisp.org. Thanks for listening and have a blessed day on the way.